Welcome to this session, which we're calling Inclusive Marketing Channels. The idea is basically to ensure that you are reaching everyone. Now, when I say everyone, it doesn't actually mean everyone, but it's everyone who is appropriate to the communications that you're putting out. And so that you're not precluding anybody from getting the value that you hope you're looking to share with your audience. So what we're going to look at here in this session is how to design and select a choice of marketing channels that reflect the diversity of your customer base or the prospects that you're looking to attract to your brand, to your product, or to your organization. So we're going to look to give you a practical evidence-based framework for doing some planning in this area and also delivering inclusive marketing through the right mix of channels. So it's about channel selection and it's about getting the framework right, if you like, for actually being able to deliver this kind of thing consistently. So we're going to combine some peer-reviewed research, some real-world examples, and some practical tools. So by the end of this, I'll have given you a step-by-step approach, which will include accessibility, culture, communications design, everything in your toolbox that you require to reach everyone appropriately and reflect the diversity of those audiences. So why does this kind of inclusive marketing, if we call it that, why does this actually matter? And the choice of channels, why is that important in marketing today? Well, inclusive marketing will expand both your reach and your relevance. In other words, you will attract the right kind of people to your messages and you will become more relevant and more valuable. And of course, by doing that, you'll become more engaging. So those relationships that you build will become more relevant both to the audience and also to you. There's a lot of research, I mean, a huge amount of research in this whole area. Two-thirds of consumers are likely to take action, so purchasing or maybe sharing, becoming advocates, after seeing diverse or inclusive advertising. That's a piece of research done by Kantar. And in essence, really what it's saying is that people notice. People will take this, not for granted, but they'll take this as you really committing to your side of the relationship. So it is important. The Microsoft Inclusive Design Principle says that when you design for difference, you reach everyone. Now, this is interesting because when you think of inclusive marketing, I mean, if you're anything like me, it is about kind of almost reaching to the sort of the edge, if you like, and the boundary of the people who are kind of right on the edge of being relevant to your product and service. But actually, the correct answer is that this is applying to everybody. So inclusivity isn't just about bringing those who are on the edge into the game. It's actually about saying, look, everybody we're communicating to is going to find some relevance in what we're doing. So this really is important to position your brand, position your products and services with both relevance, but also with a almost a purpose. And this is kind of really at the core of responsible marketing and communications. So by the time we've covered all of these things here, what I'm hoping you will have understood here is that you're going to be able to audit your channels for inclusivity and accessibility. So I've got a few things to share there of quick wins, things that you can do to see how you are playing right here, right now. We're also going to give you an opportunity to maybe select some platforms that reflect the audience diversity because not everybody puts the same value in the channels that you're providing your messages through. So some people will be social media, some people will want to get your stuff through email, other people will be happy to spend time on your website. So everybody's a little bit different. So we need to explore kind of where these different groupings, if you like, are actually seeing value from what you do. Then we're going to look at applying some tools and frameworks to ensure that you can consistently be accessible. And there's a lovely phrase here, culturally intelligent. Doesn't that sound good? I mean, I'd love to be culturally intelligent, but basically what it means is very much that you are looking and understanding and responding to the nuances that appear, all the different little contexts that appear throughout your audience. Because if you look around the room, I mean, let's just use that phrase, look around the room, and what you'll see is that there are people of different shapes, sizes, colors. They'll have different opinions, different preferences, and this is great. I mean, this is really good because it makes us, as marketers and as communicators, totally awake to difference. But the difference we can then celebrate because we understand that, well, those people there, this is what they need and how they need it. But the people over there, look, they're slightly different. So what they're going to take is this different version of that same thing. And by doing it this way and being really awake as a communicator, not just putting one flavor out and thinking everybody's going to enjoy this flavor, but actually thinking what's in it for each and every individual here? What are they going to perceive here? Because they're all subtly different. And if we can take their perspectives, plural, and share with them through the right channels and the right communications, we stand a chance of building inclusivity into every stage of the channels that we select and the communications that we put through those channels. And we're going to get this thing right. And if we do get this thing right, well, this is going to really knock the competitors out of the ballpark because we're going to be doing responsible marketing in the way that it was intended. And that is so important. So let's look at some of the foundations. Let's kind of sort of put some of these building blocks into place before we begin. So one of the key things is to really understand what inclusive marketing actually really means. Okay, so this is going to mean that you need to really be focusing in on going beyond representation and include access, equity, and empathy in everything you deliver. And what we really mean by that is kind of answering the key question is who might be excluded from this message and why? So if you think about, this is a real foundation of kind of this mindset as a marketer that you need, is if you look at maybe the latest social media post that you put out. So just look at that just for a moment. I mean, if you can get access to it whilst we're talking this through, just have a little look at it and think, who might be excluded from this message because of the style of the wording, because of the imagery that I use, because of the time of day that I put this out? Is there anybody who I'm really looking to target here because there's value I can provide that I've excluded through a whole host of possible different reasons? And then why? Why would they feel excluded? Why do they not feel part of this message? Because, of course, we know that people make decisions both through the head and the heart. So they might love the product, they might think the price is great, but the way you've positioned it feels, okay, it's good, but it's not really for me, is it? It's clearly not meant for me. And then you've lost them, they're gone. So that's what we're looking at here is really understanding who might be excluded from the way we're doing things and why. That's a really big starting point. So some of the things that we can actually look through here are things that we can bind together really in what we call the Inclusive Marketing Channel Framework, the IMCF. The first thing is access. Okay, so if you're choosing a particular channel to get your message out, and when we're saying channel, you can imagine actually the fuel that goes into that channel is your content. So it's both the tool that you're using to communicate with, and also then the language that you're using and the content you're using within that channel. So it's kind of two things together. So the first thing is access. Can everyone use this channel? Is it relevant to everyone? Can they access it? So, for example, some channels that you could argue and some social networks work far, far better on a mobile device, for example. But if your target audience, maybe some of your target audience, wouldn't actually be using or even considering using a mobile device to listen to your messages, it's unlikely they're going to be using channels like social networks that are predominantly using a mobile device. So TikTok, Instagram, for example, work far, far better, I mean, infinitely better on a mobile device than they do on a big screen. So again, just thinking about the access. And it's not that it's right or wrong. It's not that you're going to stop doing stuff, but it's about being aware of your channel choices. So think, can everyone use this channel? That's the access bit. Second bit in our framework is representation. Does your channel choice or choices reflect your audience? In other words, and I've used this phrase a lot over the decades when I've kind of, been making channel choices. I've said, do I want to go and play in my audience or my customers' playground, or am I going to drag them kicking and screaming into my playground? And that is often how it feels, isn't it? If you feel as a customer, potential prospect, or a consumer, that they're talking your language, the brand I'm talking about here, and also they're doing it in a space that you're comfortable in as the customer, well, you're much more likely to engage. And of course, that's pretty frictionless because they've come to you. Whereas if you think of brands where it's hard work because the channels that they want to talk to you on, you've got to kind of click the link, you've got to log in, you've got to set up an account, you then get verification, and you've got all these friction points, which makes it hard to actually engage. Then that isn't going to be representing your audience. So think about, where are they? How can I get to them? What are their channel choices? Might not be the ones I'm most comfortable with, but actually, if they're already there, that's their playground. They're comfortable. Maybe there's a chance to be more inclusive by going to them rather than trying to get them to come to me. Cultural relevance is the third one. Does it resonate respectfully? Now, this is a really key word here, respect. Responsible marketing and inclusive marketing is just wholeheartedly respectful. It doesn't mean you're going to get it right every time. It doesn't mean that you're going to fall short at certain points. These are sensitive topics, they're nuanced, they're very kind of detailed. There's lots of context here. You've got to live and breathe this before you know if you're even standing a chance of getting it right. But if you do this in a respectful way, if you use best endeavors, if you try your best, if you show that you're really committed to this, then you will be more culturally relevant than people who are trying to fudge it. And we've seen brands who are trying to do that. They stand out like a sore thumb, and it really doesn't work. So you've just got to think, does my channel choice and all the content that's going through that channel resonate respectfully with my audience? Am I really treating them with respect? Am I kind of valuing their time and energy when they engage with me? Or am I just pushing it out there in a real kind of hard, covert, or sort of overt rather, promotional way? Because if that's all I'm doing, then I'm falling short. But if I'm genuinely thinking about them and trying my best, I'm not going to be perfect, but if I'm trying my best, then I'm making good progress towards this cultural relevance that they're seeking. And the fourth thing, access, representation, cultural relevance, and then feedback. Can people engage and respond? One of the foundations, one of the key foundations for inclusive marketing and choosing channels is to give a very simple and clear engagement and response feedback loop. In other words, at every point, the person that you're targeting gets a very comfortable way of being able to respond back, to give you feedback, to ask questions, to maybe complain even. And let's welcome a complaint because it's a learning opportunity, isn't it? All right, it's a bit of a cliche, but it is true. So think, how, from the last thing I published, how can people engage and respond? And is it appropriate and is it on their terms? Or am I just trying to do it because it benefits me? These are the foundations of inclusive marketing. So these are going to play out as we start to think now in more detail about things like, as we're going to go to next, understanding the audience. Now, for many marketers, many communicators, in fact, actually many people in business, understanding your audience is all about cultural sensitivity. It's about gender, it's about ethnicity, it's about location, it's about age, it's about all of these things that we typically would have called segmentation. It's been a little bit of a taboo thing to do outside of marketing circles, to segment, because that's going to be generalizing, isn't it? Now, I would always argue that understanding your audience, mapping audience diversity, using data, not assumptions, so you can build these profiles, we call them personas or segments, demographics, whatever you want to call them, is a great thing to do with the intention of personalization. That's the key here. This is the caveat when anybody ever challenges me about, oh, you shouldn't be doing that because that's personalization and that's segmentation and that's grouping people. They might not all be the same. Well, actually, as a marketer, if I can create data that actually gives me the evidence that I'm not just doing stuff based on my personal bias and assumptions, but I'm doing it in a way that actually reflects the behavior of this group of people who actually do all behave in the same way. It's not me making it up, it's I've got the evidence that they do. So there's a strong likelihood that based on a combination of their ethnicity, their income, their digital access, their age, whatever those things are, that they are actually going to want to take my product and service messages in the same way. And so what we're doing here is we're saying segmentation and persona building is for personalization. So that's a relevant kind of communication style rather than generalization. If you fall into the trap of generalizing because you're doing this segmentation, then you have failed as a marketer. Genuinely, you have. Because if you can grab the evidence, you can back up your decision making and your prioritization and your creation of these segments by saying it's evidence based and here's my evidence. It's tangible. I've researched it. I've got the numbers. And I'm going to serve these people because they're all acting and behaving and looking at me in the same way. I'm going to serve them with this channel and this kind of content. Then I'm doing a good job as a responsible marketer because I'm trying to personalize what I'm giving them in a way that gives them even more value. So the kind of real sense check here is that if ever challenged and people say, well, it's not the right thing to do, you shouldn't be, doing this segmentation, that's ugly, that's dangerous kind of stuff, is actually look at the audience, ask the audience, actually, did you get more value by me doing it this way? Or would you like a generic one flavor, one size fits all approach? And they're guaranteed to say, well, no, obviously not. I want you to give it to me in a way that suits me, a way that's much more relevant to who I am and what I need. So the common sense feature comes into play here. Don't be frightened of this stuff. As soon as people start talking ethnicity and gender, they're almost like the alarm bells start to go off, and it doesn't have to be that way. If you've got the evidence, you're doing this in a really responsible and kind of respectful way, you're going to win. You're going to provide more value, and that's really important. So we're looking here to kind of really enrich, if you like, our persona building exercises. And now most of us as marketers will have built personas so that we've got this kind of this North Star person who we're targeting. And of course, there might be a whole range of them. And by then including this word inclusivity or inclusion, we can start to think about them. And we can start to go a lot deeper. So we can actually start to build in any accessibility needs. I mean, maybe some personas that we're building here need some kind of assistive technology, for example, to be able to access the kind of, channels that we're choosing. I mean, a very, very simple example here is people who may have some kind of visual impairment. So, traditionally, what we've done with our websites is we've always had imagery on those websites. It's got a very clear description. It's very accurately titled. The alt text, the alternative text, which is so good for screen readers where people aren't actually seeing visually the image, but what they're doing is that they're having their screen reader talk about what's in that image. And that helps with people who have a visual impairment, who may well have images switched off because they can't physically see them. So what we're doing here is we're addressing some accessibility needs with our choice of channels in a respectful, in a really kind of conscious and considered way. So this isn't something to run from and think, oh, this is all in the too hard to do box, and what if I get it wrong? It's about making those conscious decisions that I'm going to commit to this. I'm going to really learn about what my audience needs and deliver them some stuff that will add additional value to the experience. Because ultimately, that's what we're talking about here, an inclusive experience for all. And of course, we can bring in, things like the digital literacy level that particular persona might have. They might be very, very digitally literate, or you might be talking to one group who are very, very kind of almost averse to using digital to engage with you. And of course, then the approaches and the channel choices, if I can get my words out, the channel choices are also then going to be different. So it's interesting, but also cultural and language preferences. Again, not assuming that everybody views the world like you do or like I do. And of course, they don't. And again, another thing to celebrate because the deeper you go into this, the more you realize that not just as a business professional, but as a human being, you can actually learn a lot. You can learn about cultural difference. You can learn about how language impacts on the way that a message is or isn't delivered, or how it impacts on people. Yeah, this is wonderful stuff in terms of our personal learning and personal development. And again, as long as it's done in a responsible, authentic, respectful way, it is something to be embraced. So we have a little bit of a checklist. I've given that whole thing about diverse kind of imagery, if you like, considerations on a website. And again, that's another nice one to sort of be playing with and using, which I always find that's a good one. But we've got a little inclusive channel audit checklist. So websites, for example, there are compliance access regulations that you need to be kind of looking for, and certainly being very aware of and adhering to, and some little checks. So representation would be then some diverse imagery considerations. So maybe you put some policies together about how you're going to look at your imagery, and make sure that it's appealing to all the groups that you're addressing. Cultural relevance, if there is some kind of localized language or maybe even just tone of voice that is different for different personas or different groups or different segments, you need to be including that. And in terms of feedback, the contact accessibility, making sure that you're giving these contact or feedback loops to your customers in a way that enables them to respond and that is, I use this word again, frictionless, really important. If you're using email, I've obviously mentioned social media quite a bit, but if you're using something like email, it is, in terms of accessibility, having readable fonts and contrast. So putting a dark grey onto a black background in terms of text, for example, is not necessarily going to be very readable for a lot of people. And I would probably put myself in that category. I wouldn't really be looking to do that. So high contrast is obviously really good. Little simple design techniques that can help. In representation considerations here with email, is you need to be using inclusive language. So yeah, really understanding the tone of voice, style, and language that your audience would be using. Make it appropriate. Cultural relevance, of course, is about translations. And again, a lot of the AI tools and a lot of the email platforms now enable you to translate content based on your customer relationship management system. So if you know somebody's first language is not, your native language, then you can actually deliver the content to them in that kind of more appropriate way. And as far as feedback is concerned with an email, it's things like an easy unsubscribe, obviously super important, and as part of the regulation, something that hopefully you're already doing anyway. With socials, accessibility is all about captions, alt text, all those kinds of things. Again, if you're using video, most of us are now, having the whole kind of subtitles and captions, enabling people to engage irrespective of their preferences. In terms of representation, creator diversity. That's an interesting one. Being really considerate over who you're actually sort of putting as the face of your organization, as the face of your business. Maybe mixing it up a little bit to represent the audience that you're looking to engage with. The cultural relevance is platform demographics. I covered this one a little bit earlier in terms of, who's actually using the channels in social that you are looking to put your content out through. Just because it's the biggest channel in the world does not mean it's the best channel for you. So making those conscious decisions so that you hit the right audience at the right time with the right messages. And in terms of feedback, content and comment moderation, really key, particularly if we were using any kind of automation or scheduling. That is really running at odds with what we're talking about here, because having somebody, a human, or somebody who can actually then come back, either moderating content or answering questions, providing feedback on any kind of comment threads, is a really important and inclusive way of getting this engagement. And of course, with all of these platforms, you get rewarded. The algorithms work well if you do this stuff. This isn't just me saying it's a nice thing to do. You will get the commercial rewards as well as the intrinsic kind of emotional rewards from your audience. So you're going to get a win-win-win if you consider this stuff. It's really important. And in terms of kind of going a little bit deeper with this sort of thing, is we need to obviously make sure that you're very up to date and aware of the accessibility guidelines and any kind of regulations within your industry and more generally. So we're looking at a whole range of different little techniques to make sure, for example, that your website is accessible. It is things like the color contrast ratio, it's screen reader compatibility that I mentioned before, keyboard navigation, caption video content. And there are tools available that will enable you to make sure that you are actually playing to the very latest guidelines or regulations. So going into those in some depth and actually doing maybe a little audit. And what a great time of the year to be doing that if you were to do it right now. This would be a really good time as you're preparing maybe for the coming quarters in terms of any kind of improvement opportunities or redesigns or new campaigns. It's a really important thing to make sure that you're scaling the right stuff, not just scaling what you've always done, which may fall foul of some of the regulations. Inclusive social media, some of the practical steps, we've already talked about a few of these things like captioning videos, but avoiding, flashing GIFs or low contrast graphics, and maybe representing a variety of voices and accents in video and voice content. This is an interesting one because it gives your brand an opportunity to share a different style, maybe, or a different kind of sort of proportional aspect of what you do. So rather than having, as I said earlier, one face of the organization who is instantly identifiable, but just gives this very narrow track in which you can talk, maybe having different people at different times saying different things in different styles can be a more inclusive way of working. Now, some of the platforms have already got these things inherently bought into them. So TikTok, for example, has auto captioning, which you can switch on or off. LinkedIn accessibility, image tags are also there as well. You can do a little bit of a deep dive into those. So there are things already programmed in that you need to be aware of. So yes, it is the content quality that you're putting in there, but it's also what that content quality then does within each channel, because each channel is going to be subtly different. And that is really the point that we're starting to make here. And as you then bind in your email and CRM channels, making sure again you're giving, a really, really easy to read, high contrast, and also things like plain text alternatives. That's inclusivity. So you might want to be putting your latest brand styling into your next email, but actually some people actually respond better to plain text email. They do. It's hard to believe, isn't it, in this multi kind of media, sort of media rich kind of world that we live in, that, people would actually revert back to just plain text. But look at your data, look at the evidence and see who within your databases, who within your CRM would respond better to things that are much more simple. So you don't have to, by going inclusive, you don't have to complicate things. Sometimes making things more simple is a great way of moving forward. And then we need to, across all of our channels, be focusing in on what we're calling cultural intelligence. Now, I used this word, or these words a little bit earlier, and this is basically cultural nuance. And what do I mean by nuance? Well, it's basically adjusting the tone and format because different markets, different personas, different segments are going to respond differently to your different calls to action. And some might prefer some kind of community-based messages. Some will prefer much more direct contact. Some will prefer a much more kind of social proof angle, whereas other markets, other different cultures we'll be looking at something that's a lot more directive and a lot more one-to-one engagement. You cannot just take a simple one view and think it's going to apply to everyone. So understanding the different communities, the different demographics, and the different cultures that you're working with enables you to build maybe a different flow through your channels of engagement, all the way through to the calls to action, which need to have a style appropriate to that audience. And of course, it gets even more complicated if you're trying to do cultural intelligence through multilingual or multicultural channels. So translating not just language, but context becomes important. You can do just a simple, English into language X, whatever language X is for you. You can do that. Yeah, obviously you can. But understanding how that language then in that local tongue actually plays out culturally is really important. Putting local visuals, symbols, and holidays, localizing those for different audiences, also really, really important. And there are now some channel platforms that enable you to do much more professional translation. So Transifex and Smartling are two to experiment with here, because these will avoid just the auto translate where, your brand message can be completely misinterpreted by just literally going from English to a different language. It's the cultural sensitivity that needs to also be brought in that is really, really important. And this also applies to not necessarily just different languages, but different communities and maybe niche channels. Inclusion means meeting audiences where they gather. And I've already said, playing in their playground. Different platforms, things like Discord, for example, is very appropriate as a community channel for youth and gaming communities. Nextdoor, for example, would be very good if you're trying to appeal to local neighborhoods, again, who have a very different style and maybe will approach your products or services in a different way that is localized to them. And there's a really interesting one which I've been watching with interest over the years, which is We Are Eight, which is an ethical ad-supported platform. Again, another one that is very much purpose-driven. So building credibility through maybe community partnerships can be really good for addressing these community or niche channels. They can be hugely powerful if you get it right. You can fall flat on your face if you get it wrong and try and misrepresent what you do in these channels, but get it right, and they can be advocates for life. So there is a huge benefit of taking this stuff seriously, doing it small, maybe experimenting, maybe being introduced into a channel or a niche community by somebody who's already there, maybe a friend, a colleague, or business partner, introducing you in, and then you can look and learn and watch. So active listening comes into play here. And of course, you can have representation in paid channels. So doing an audit of ad placement, which avoids platforms may be associated with misinformation or some hate content. Some of the platforms now have, I'm not going to name any specific ones, but you'll probably know who I'm talking about here, have been very, very big social media platforms who have been rebranded and now sort of, viewing the world in maybe we could argue a more biased way and a less kind of inclusive way, even though they might claim inclusion. So just being really sensitive to both the audience, but also the channel choice as well is super, super important. So this is complicated stuff. It really is. I mean, inclusive design, particularly when you're looking to kind of bind in here AI and automation. I mentioned it a little bit when I talked about using social media as a channel and then really understanding that it's not only about publishing stuff out, responsibly and inclusively through social media, but it's about actually getting the feedback and being there to listen. When using AI content or ad targeting tools, not only do we need to there be listening to the response as they come in, so not just leaving the AI to itself, but actually ensuring when we're editing a potential post that is being created with AI, maybe in collaboration or just solely produced by AI, ensuring that we don't do bias. Bias is one of those things that is so, so key. It's very easy to be over biased. We all have bias in ourselves. We all do. It's how we're built as human beings. But just mitigating that so that we don't preclude people being engaged with the content, that's the key. You can't avoid bias. You can't be 100% non-biased. It's just not how humans work. And as we bring AI into the mix here, it's about just being conscious. And there are tools. OpenAI Bias Evaluation Guide is a good one. The Google Responsible AI Toolkit will help you to think about some of the things that will mitigate a huge amount of bias. We can't avoid it, but we can actually mitigate it so we can reduce the amount of bias that might be present. And this is very much coming through in a lot of the regulations that we see. And this is where staying very close to a lot of the ICO regulations. There's a report called Data Ethics for Marketers, which I would encourage you to be having a look at. And this is all about when we actually get into these kind of more nuanced, inclusive communications with our customers, it is about collecting only necessary data. It is about disclosing targeting logic very clearly. It is about giving those unsubscribe opportunities so people can remove themselves if they feel like you just didn't quite get it right. You just didn't quite respect where I was as a customer. So I'm actually going to remove myself from our relationship. If people want to do that, it's about permission. It's about giving them the route to do that. You are never going to appeal to everybody. You're never going to get it 100% right, but you will make improvements if you follow a lot of these ethics and transparency guidelines. And so the real world kind of things that you can start to do to kind of bring all of this stuff, this awareness of the fact that we're not looking at perfection, but we are looking at respect, openness, transparency, and a good intention for getting this thing right, is to begin really with some internal inclusion training. You know, if you work with an agency or colleagues, or well, you probably almost certainly got a line manager, somebody you report into, is making sure that everybody's aware that we all, and I'm putting myself in this category too, we all need ongoing bias and accessibility awareness training. You know, there are many, many sources that you can do this from. You can get a bit of help from your favorite AI, of course you can, but there are some e-learning platforms as well. Albright, the Valuable 500, Purple Space, they all include opportunities for you to just really kind of raise the game. And I would suggest that you're doing this as well, not only just yourself personally, but for those around you, because this is going to include everyone. It's very easy for somebody to fall foul of, you know, the regulations or the guidelines or just best practice by just a lack of awareness. So make sure if you're starting down this road that you help everyone to buy into this, including agencies or partners outside of your organization. It also comes into those choices of partners and any kind of buying in of services. So we would always say, you know, as part of this mix is selecting suppliers who share similar inclusion values that you do. You know, adding diversity and inclusion questions to agency briefs is a great one to just kind of suss out as a bit of an audit. How does this agency, how do they respond when challenged on this particular question? You know, this is not about precluding people from working with you, but it's about understanding who are our stakeholders. How can we collectively, as a giant community, including the customers, learn how to work better together? And this can, you know, examples of this can be inclusive hiring, accessibility standards, ethical sourcing. You know, there's a whole range of different procurement guidelines that can enable you to do this well. So it is you, it is about you understanding and taking the lead here, but it's about those around you and those, you know, beyond your initial circle of influence who you're trying to get on board too. Super important, this stuff. So let's start to kind of wrap this up into some kind of guide, step by step, of what you can do. So the first thing I would suggest is an audit. Use the inclusive channel checklist that we saw before to just have a little bit of an audit of where am I right now? How confident am I on a scale of 1 to 10 across all of these channel checklist guidelines? Where am I? And can I gather evidence that is going to enable me to really show objectively this is where I am? Doesn't matter where you are, you could be in a terrible position as long as you're making intention and gain here to move things forward. Second thing I would suggest in our guide is to prioritize. Identify the top 3 areas for improvement. Now, these could be the ones that are either quick wins or the ones that you feel, oh, that one's a little bit embarrassing. We need to address that one first. So you're going to be able to choose. You know, this is not for me to say it's got to be this one or this one, or, you know, it's always on this particular topic. You'll get a feel. Go with the gut reaction as much as the evidence. Go with a feel for the things that you think you really should be improving. When you look at stuff, some things will shout louder than others. So give those the initial intention. You can change those priorities if you need to. The next thing then to do is to plan. So set some smart inclusion goals for each campaign or project or thing that you're going to do next, and then watch. Execute is the next step that you're going to be doing in the guide. So apply accessibility and cultural localization, any of those things, those reducing as far as you can any kind of bias. And by doing this in a really kind of persona sensitive way, you can then evaluate, which is the next step in our guide. So track inclusion KPIs, set up some stuff, some little indicators that will show how you're progressing against the audit towards those smart goals of some better position or better situation that you want to be in. That's really important. Having those KPIs is going to give you the confidence that, hey, look, we're not perfect, but look how we've progressed. Look at our imagery. Look at our tone of voice. Look how we've split our market and the way that we've chosen those channels to address these different markets to get different calls to action for these different audiences. At least we've done that. At least we've been a little bit more specific rather than just generalized in our communications. And as part of that evaluation, do the final stage, report. Document all changes and learning. This is an ongoing process. It is one of those things, it's one of those responsible marketing processes that once you've opened the box, you can't close it. You can't unknow this stuff now. We've been talking about this now for long enough, haven't we, that you can kind of see that it is logical, it is common sense, and it is better practice. So now you know that documenting the progress you're making, and then learning where it's a difficult thing to do, where you need some extra help, where you need to learn more, where you need to continuously improve again and again and again. That's what can come through in the report. And share those reports far and wide. Maybe even publish them openly on your website. There's a thought. That's true inclusion, isn't it? Where you're showing your purpose-driven journey, your real commitment to this in public. It's an interesting thought. Your customers will be interested, trust me, and certainly any partners looking to work with you, it'll be a great filter for who are the right organizations to work with. And if you want to get some quick wins, often, we find with this sort of thing, it can sound, oh my goodness, this is all very big, very strategic, very kind of complicated, and I'm super busy right now, so I haven't got time to do this. Well, let's get some quick wins this month. Here are some things that you can do which could actually roll this out very quickly if you chose to. You could add alt text to all social posts, alternative text to all social posts. You could review font sizes and contrast in email templates. Make sure that's consistent. Small tactical thing, but look at the difference that it makes. You could use an inclusive language checker. Textio is a good one that you might want to have a little play with. And you could schedule accessibility audits for your website. Maybe you don't do the whole website, maybe you do sections of it. Maybe areas of the website that haven't necessarily performed well. You do a little bit of an accessibility audit because it might be that this inclusion conversation that we're having is the reason. It might not be the fact that it's not a great website. It might not be that the products and services aren't relevant. It might just be accessibility. And then by doing that audit, you've got the evidence then to put that into your inclusive marketing plan, maybe for the upcoming quarters. So those could be some quick wins this month. If you're struggling to identify anything for yourself really sort of easily, then those could be some quick wins that you could do. But you might already have thought of some stuff. And as I said, one of the quickest quick wins is look at your last social media post. How inclusive was that? That's probably the quickest of the quick wins because it's pretty much there right in your face. And you can start to think through some of these processes, actually using that as an example. So that can be really, really good. So finally, some key takeaways. This is kind of my view of why this stuff is so, so important, why inclusive marketing channels, which hopefully are now going to reach everyone in a relevant and appropriate way, why these things are so important to add into your marketing mix. So inclusion must be designed in, really, going forward, mustn't it? It is the right thing to do. It is responsible marketing. So rather than considering it, oh, we'll carry on doing what we do and we'll add it in later, think about it now. Now you know this stuff. Inclusion must be designed in now. So accessibility equals access to information. Access to information. There's the real thing from your customer's perspective. Is your information accessible in all the ways that we've talked about? Representation equals connection and trust. If you're representing and you're inclusive, then you will form deeper connection. you'll establish better trust, and you'll see that come through in the KPIs of things like loyalty, advocacy, and further engagement. Those are the real KPIs that show whether you've got this right. It isn't about just what you think, it's about actually getting the proof from the customer. And the third one is cultural nuance. I've used this word nuance quite a bit. Cultural nuance equals relevance and respect. And you'll know when you get this right because people will tell you. The feedback that will come through will be subtly different, or it might be majorly different to everything that you've heard and had before. That's a really exciting one. You know when you've got this right, when accessibility, representation, and cultural nuance come together. And inclusive marketing channels then, and the content that goes through them then become strategic tools for growth and fairness. And what is not to like? As a responsible marketer, that is what we're trying to do. We're trying to make these inclusive marketing channels literally reach everyone in the right kind of way so that we can build a better world, a better sector, a better community, and get this ongoing engagement where it's human to human in the right kind of way. So it's a win-win and valuable for everybody.